Good evening. The moment of truth is if Douglas can get the computer to work. I tried my best to look British. The mustache and this. And Karen actually said it to me, I need a pocket watch. I do actually have one, but I forgot it at home. I had it all sorted out, and I thought a pipe probably is not going to work in Adventists. But I don't have one, so that was a solve. But I'm going to take my coat off because it's way too hot to wear tweed today. I'm going to be talking about theological storytelling for the contemporary world, and I thought that was a very boring title, so I called my talk, Everything is Awesome. I love to tell stories. I think it's actually the best way to share anything, including God. Sometimes I have very narrative sermons, and I remember one time when I was still pastoring a church, I had a sermon that consists simply of 4 stories, and it was awesome. And I remember standing at the door at the end, shaking the hands, and the first one to run to it is one of the students who never really enjoys church. You know the one. And she ran to me, and she shook my hand, and she said, "That was the best sermon I've ever heard." And she said, "It's so great how you didn't tell me what to think, but that you led me to a place where I could think for myself. You let me draw my own conclusions. That I spoke to her without telling her what to think." And a couple of months ago, I saw her again, and she still remembers that sermon and which 4 stories I told. The funny thing is, 2 hands later, I had one of the elder members from the church. You know, the woman who sits at the back row. And she shook my hand, and she said, "Well, Tom, couldn't you think of anything to say today?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, you just told us some stories. And then you said amen. What am I meant to take home? What was the lesson? Why didn't you edify us? Where were the morals?" It's funny how life is sometimes. If we talk about contemporary culture in the contemporary world, we can say that the contemporary culture appreciates stories in a much greater way than before. In fact, storytelling has become a vital part of our contemporary culture, as evidenced by the young student who liked it and the elder person who didn't. You see, our culture, my generation, has been raised on the stories of publishing houses and Hollywood, on the stories of games, movies, and books. And stories have become a primary mode of expression, simply because stories are awesome. My grandmother used to tell us stories, and not just any stories. These were really, really awesome stories. Her stories were TV and internet for us, and it was better than both put together. And the best part was that my grandmother used to live in our house. So she was available to us 24/7. Always available. I remember getting up before dawn and going down to the little granny flat where my grandmother used to live, waking her up to tell me a story. And her best story was about Johnny and the ox. See, Johnny was my grandmother's brother, and he had the best adventures. And I learned many life lessons from Johnny, and Johnny and the ox taught me 2 things, depending on which version my grandmother would tell, because the stories changed. They were true, but not always the same. Sometimes I learned that if you see the rotting carcass of an animal out in the veldt, you should not go around and play with it, because you'd probably get sick and die. Some terrible disease that I still don't know what it is, but like enteric. And fortunately, Johnny didn't die because he got lucky, but I definitely would. Sometimes I learned that if you decide to play with the rotting carcass of an animal found in the veldt, you shouldn't lie to your parents about what you did, because that would make things worse. And those life lessons have stayed with me my entire life, and they clearly work, because up until this day, I've never touched a dead ox. And I haven't died of it either. And the funny thing is, these lessons that I learned from my grandmother, I didn't learn because my grandmother told me what to do, but I learned them because my grandmother told me a story. The stories of my grandmother never had this Puritan lesson attached to the end with, "And don't you then lie to mommy and daddy." No, they ended, and you could draw your own conclusions. And I'd share Johnny and the Ox with you, but it's a little bit graphic and not really suited for this. I mean, 6-year-old boys love it. But, we've moved on. So I'd like to tell you another one of my grandmother's story called The Neighbor's Bunny. Peter is a young boy, and Peter really, really wants a dog. And every morning as he wakes up, when he goes down for breakfast, he asks Mom, "Can I have a dog?" Mom says, "No, you can't have a dog." And he says, "Why can't we have a dog?" And Mom says, "Well, the neighbor has a bunny. And the neighbor loves that bunny more than her own children. And if we get a dog, you never know what happens, but he might escape and something might happen to that bunny, and that would be a disaster." The next morning, Peter wakes up and says, "Mommy, can I have a bunny?" And this goes on for days and days and days and days, until eventually Peter gets a brainwave. I'll ask Dad. Because that's how it works, right? If Mom says no, you always go to Dad. And he goes to Dad and he says to Dad, "Dad, can I buy a bunny? Well, bunny. Can I have a dog? Can I have a dog, Dad?" And Dad says, "Okay, well, if you stop complaining about it, I'll talk to Mom." And one day Peter comes home. He never complains, obviously. He comes home, and what does he see? This dog, but not a little dog, a huge dog. One of those dogs that children can ride on, like a horse. And he's got this dog, and he's so happy, and he plays with the dog, and he takes care of the dog, and every night he locks the dog up very well because of the neighbor's bunny. And this works well, and he takes care of the dog, looks after the dog, locks it up until Christmas comes around. And I've modernized the story a little bit, and he gets a PlayStation. He gets the PlayStation, and he's really excited about the PlayStation. And he has a friend over, and he's playing with the PlayStation, and he forgets all about the dog. And suddenly he hears barking from outside, and he looks out the window, and he sees the dog's free, and it's got something in its mouth. And he runs downstairs, because he already knows what's in the mouth, and he looks in it, and it's the bunny of the neighbor. And the bunny of the neighbor is dead. Disaster. Disaster. He doesn't know what to do, but he knows he better not tell Mom, because Mom is going to be really upset. So he takes the bunny, puts it in a shoebox, hides it in his closet, and waits for Dad to come home. And he's waiting, and he's waiting, and the PlayStation is no more fun because he's too worried. And Dad comes home, and there's dinner time, and he has to wait till dinner's finished, and then he has to do the dishes. And finally he can talk to Dad, and he says to Dad, "Let's go upstairs." And he walks up the stairs, and he opens the cupboard, and he opens the box, and he says to Dad, "Look at this." And the dad says, "Is that the neighbor's bunny?" And he says, "Yes, Dad." And Dad says, "Oh no, what we're going to do, because I bought that dog for you, or your mom is going to kill me." So he says, "You know what we'll do? You distract Mom. You distract Mom, and I will solve this." And this bunny is obviously dirty and muddy and covered in saliva and everything. So he thinks, "I'm going to have to get this bunny in pristine condition." So he shouts down to Mommy, "I'm going to have a shower." And he jumps in the shower, bunny under the arm, and he washes his hair, and he's washing the bunny's hair. Jumps out the shower, he dries his hair, he dries the bunny's hair. And then he says to Peter, "Okay, when we are sleeping tonight, you sneak out and put the bunny back in the cage, and the neighbor won't notice." So when everyone's asleep, Peter climbs out, he climbs over the fence, he goes to the cage, he opens the cage, puts the pristine, clean, smelling slightly of soap, bunny into the cage, locks it, goes back to sleep, and has a good night's sleep. Except for the next morning, he wakes up to this amazing noise, and he thinks, what's going on? But he knows the neighbor found the dead bunny, and she's obviously distraught because she loves the bunny more than her own children. And Mommy runs over the fence and shouts, "What's up, what's up, what's wrong?" Dad and Peter come slowly because they know what's happening. And the neighbor says, "I really don't understand it. Yesterday my bunny died. I buried it, and now it's back in the cage." And then Dad and Peter had to say, "Well, we showered with the dead bunny and blow-dried its hair." Now, do I have to give you a lesson? Do I have to spend a couple of minutes saying, "Well, the thing is, dear audience, Dad and Peter must have felt like right idiots explaining that to the neighbor. If only they had told the truth from the beginning, then this would have never happened. And now they have to tell the neighbor that Dad showered with a dead bunny. Oh, so dear audience, remember this. Tell the truth because it solves many issues. Or can I just tell the story and say, go and do, and you will do?" You see, a story does not need a lesson to teach a lesson. And this is not new. No, it's not. I often use this example, and I think I actually used it here last year, so forgive me for repeating it. Jesus does the same thing. A man comes to Jesus and asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, well, the thing about neighbors is, it's not really your literal neighbor like the man who lives next to you, but it's more like the people around you, that poor guy on the street or the dude over there or even that woman, They're your neighbors. No, Jesus doesn't do that. I probably would have done that. I would have explained. But Jesus says, well, there was this guy, and he was attacked and he was robbed, and there was priest and this Levite and this foreigner and this donkey and this blah, and a whole long story. And then Jesus ends saying, which one of these do you think is the neighbor? And the man knows it's the man who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do. You see, Jesus ends the story, but he doesn't say, and you see, dear brother who asked me this, obviously the neighbor is the foreigner who helped the man, so that even the foreigner, even though he lives far away, would become his neighbor. No, Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus tells a story and says, who do you think is? And then says, go and do. Do you see what's happening? Stories tell a story, and in that story, meaning is created. Think about that. Whenever I'm hiding the truth, I don't think about the 10 Commandments. I don't think about my mother shaking her finger at me. I don't think about the hidings I received from my father for lying. I think about showering with bunnies. And then I come clean. I mean, sometimes I even say to my wife, listen, darling, I've been such an idiot, I showered with a bunny. Strange enough, I never say I played with the dead ox, but that's just me. And you see what I mean? This story created meaning in my life. And this meaning is much more memorable than a simple ethical lesson. And this story doesn't even need an explicit ethical lesson, because I can see what it is. And it is my lesson, not another's lesson. I own the lesson, it's mine. And that means it's much more valuable to me. And this is the power of stories that we'll be talking about this weekend. Because stories create meaning without forcing meaning upon the people who listen. They let you find your own meaning, your own answers, and they let you be your own boss, but still steer you in a certain direction. Why? Because stories are awesome. Now, my talk is about theological storytelling for the contemporary world. We had a little bit of storytelling. But how does this fit in with theology? And how does it fit in with the contemporary world? I said in my beginning, well, storytelling is perfectly suited for contemporary culture. And I'd like to look at that first. First, a discussion of contemporary culture in Europe and the role that storytelling can play in it. Now, I don't think I've heard this all before, because trust me, you have not. Sit up, pay attention. Contemporary culture in Europe, it's going to be awesome. Contemporary culture in Europe is more and more post-Christian. Let's say in Holland, in 1999, 1 in 4 went to church or the mosque or the temple or any other religious service once a month. Since then, that number has dropped to 1 in 8. Now, less than 1 in 10 go to church once a week. In fact, in Holland, more than half will never go to church in their life if it wasn't for weddings and funerals. If you say, does religion occupy an important place in your life? 2 out of 3 say no. If you go a little bit more north to Sweden, 7 out of 8 say no. And the worst part is, these are the averages. This includes the baby boom generation, who are more Christian than my generation. Europe is emphatically post-Christian. Now, what do I mean with this term? Well, we can broadly define a post-Christian society as a society where Christianity no longer plays a meaningful part in civil discourse or public policy. This is a society where, over time, various values, both religious and secular, have marginalized distinctly Christian values and beliefs. That is Europe as we know it. Europe is not postmodern. I assume most of you know what postmodernity is. Fortunately, Kirsten only gave me 40 minutes and not 400 minutes. So if you have some struggles with postmodernity, listen to what I said last year, where I explained it all hopefully clearly. But a brief recap, we can say postmodernity is defined by disillusionment, leading out of distrust for truth and big pictures, and a loss in a hope for a better future. And last year, and when I stood here, I said, my dad is postmodern, I am something else. And I stand by it. In the church, we often talk about contemporary culture, and we say that it is postmodern. That might have been true 20 years ago, but it is no longer. Who is the postmodern generation? Not me. I was born in 1979, the same year that the word postmodern was made up. Mr. Lyotard in France was not a prophet but an academic, and he described the current generation, not me, who was not born yet. He was describing cultural trends in France and Canada of the time, and not our current culture in 2015. He was describing my parents, and not me. See, I am the post-Christian generation. I am not the generation that left the church. I am the generation that wasn't raised Christian. I am not the generation that stopped reading the Bible. I am the generation that's never opened a Bible. My parents is the generation where you'll find the anti-Christians. My generation are just ignorant. We are post-Christian, and we are postmodern. Now, at a risk of making us even more exhausted by all these what is this postmodern generation that I feel I am part of? What is this culture? As with all ideas, it's taken us a while to put it into words, and academics have postulated a number of suggestions about where we are now and where we are headed. And I recently read an article that really resonated with me, talking about something called metamodernism. And I've spoken to literally hundreds with whom it also resonated, of my generation. You see, postmodernity, as we know it, is characterized by a destruction of hope. The utopian ideas of progress and ultimate knowledge and peace that died in the First and Second World War, and people became cynical about culture. Nothing could be seen sincere, nothing could be real. And us, growing up in a world without hope, have led to this thing called metamodernism. And these metamodern people have found a way to juggle both cynicism and hope at the same time. It's a paradox, and that's the fun. You see, without big pictures, without meta-narratives, stories telling us where we're going, there's nothing to hope for. There's no better future that you can hope for and that you believe will be coming. And you live in a hopeless society. And that's why the current generation brings back a hope in a kind of informed naivety, pragmatic idealism. We hope in something that will never come. We believe something is coming that we don't expect to ever see. I put up a very, very simple definition about metamodernism, which is metamodernism attempts, in spite of its inevitable failure. It seeks forever for a truth that it never expects to find. It tries even though it will never succeed, and it looks for something it will never find. And if we thought that postmodernity was a challenge for our church, I don't know what this is. Most of this generation is not in the church, but can you imagine what would happen if they were to join? How would a church deal with members who believe in something they know cannot be true? How do members react when my generation joins and prays to a God that they know is not there? When they passionately interpret the Word of God and love every single letter of it, and yet say it's produced fiction. When my generation is ironic and sincere at the same time. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I believe all these things or that God is not there or that the Bible is fiction. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we are successful evangelization and retention we will have members who, no matter what, will think those things I just said, who think in contradictions and cannot think without paradoxes. And that's a challenge. See, there's a generation of metamodernists, and this generation grew up knowing there is no truth, distrusting all meta-narratives, and yet feeling a desire for both truth and hope. And if somehow, despite our evangelization methods that aren't generally effective with my generation, they were to join, what you see happening is that they feel this desire for the gospel while knowing that it can't be true. They identify with the Christian message, but remain intellectually aware that it's implausible. They believe in spite of themselves in a sort of informed naivety, believing in a better world that will never come, a pragmatic idealism. Is this very strange? I do wonder, because faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and if we look at the Bible, well, it's full of paradoxes. I mean, that's Christianity. James teaches us that we'll be exalted through being humble. Paul says to the Corinthians, when I am weak, I am strong. Jesus says that we will receive through giving. Paul says to the Romans that by being set free, we have become slaves. And Jesus teaches us that through dying, we will receive life. Paul says the Philippians, his losses are gains. And Jesus says, if you lose your life, you'll find it. And if you find your life, you'll lose it. These are the contradictions that my generation thrive on. They like to oscillate, jump between these conflicting ideas, moving back and forward between two poles, focusing on the one, ignoring the other, to immediately swap to focusing on the other and ignoring the one. I see many of these people, metamodernists, in the church. They are people who, despite their cynicism, hope for a better future. It's more often in the Bible as well. In Mark 9, John comes to Jesus and says, there's someone driving out demons in your name. And Jesus says, well, everyone who's not against me is for me. But we page a few pages further, and people come to Jesus saying, well, you're driving out demons, you must be of Satan. And Jesus says, everyone who's for me is not for me, is against me. So which is it? Everyone not against Jesus is for Jesus, or everyone not for Jesus is against Jesus? It can't be both. Or can it? It's exciting to think about. The paradox is intriguing. Now, maybe what I just said resonated with you. Maybe it didn't. Maybe you know someone and you can identify with this. Maybe you don't. I've seen many people with whom this resonates. And in cultural theory, we call this the structure of feeling. And it's not some kind of touchy-feeling thing. It's called the structure of feeling, and that's the understanding that a group of people share a sentiment that they're aware of, but not easily able to explain. You see, there are many metamodernists in the church who share this sentiment, who share this sensibility, but can't easily pin it down. We know what we aren't, but we haven't always found the words to say what we are. Last week I spoke at the One Project in San Diego, and there's going to be one in Holland. There's actually in your bag a little bit of John made some advertising so I can do. There's going to be a One Project in Holland. Do come. It's going to be awesome. And at the One Project in San Diego, I spoke similar to this about metamodernism to predominantly young pastors. And about 20 to 30 came to me afterwards and said, I was listening and it sounded like you were describing to me who I am. It sounded like you were describing to me who I am. Because finally academics have found words to describe this generation. And I see many of these people in the church. They may not know the word yet, but they are metamodernist. There are people who, despite their cynicism, believe against hope for a better future. They're the people who believe disbelievingly. They're people who pray to a God who may or may not be there. And that is a challenge for our church. See, because we need to somehow become a church that allows space for disbelieving belief, for sincere irony, for people who thrive on paradoxes. We need to be a church for the current generation. And how can we be that church? Well, one of the ways is prophecy. You see, we have always positioned ourselves as a prophetic church, a church with vision. And I do hope that when we say that we value prophecy, that we identify ourselves as part of prophecy, but that we also ourselves fulfill the role of prophets. See, prophecy is a strange idea that never really fit into any of the modes of thinking. Modernism can't deal with it because it's too future-focused and not scientific enough. Prophecy fits nicely in selling big pictures with modernism, but the ground it stands on is not scientific. Postmodernism couldn't deal with it either because it's selling a future that is probably not true. But prophecy fits wonderfully in metamodernism. You see, prophecy stands with one foot in the present and one foot in the future. Prophecy points forward in a time towards an expectant future in a different time. It points forward firmly grounded in the present. And prophecy is what we so desperately need, a paradoxical focus to switch between both temporarily, now and in the future, and attitudinally, skeptical reluctance, hopeful possibility. There is hope of something yet to come, and the disappointment of not being there yet. But it's even deeper than that. In fact, this is a quote from Gibbons, in fact, I hesitantly prophesize that the act of dreaming might just be more important than whether or not the dreams come true. The power of prophecy is not what the modernists believe, that if the prophecy comes true, it proves that the prophet was credible. The power of prophecy is something inherent in the medium. By prophesying, you do something that is more important than the prophecy itself. By prophesying, you change the world, not because the prophecies happen, but because your act of prophesying happened. If we want to be a church that meets contemporary culture, we need to be a prophetic church of prophecy and prophets. We need to speak up against injustice, even though we know it won't help. We need to open our doors on Sabbath, even though there's danger for Sabbath keepers. We need to help the hungry, even though there will be more hungry tomorrow. Another way the church can be a church for contemporary people is utopia. Utopia is the idea of a perfect city, place, world. For us, think heaven. Have you noticed that many youngsters are disillusioned with the church? That they call out that we need to stop wasting our time talking about details and go out and do something? I hear this almost daily from the youngsters in Holland. We need to hit the streets and do something. We need to impact. And it's a worldwide phenomena. And I'd like to link it with metamodernism. You see, the current generation was born into a world that is ruined. A world that has been ruined by our parents. A world of climate change and economic crisis. A world where governments can't get their acts together and just rule. A world where Europe is falling. A world where the hopeful multiculturalism of the 90s has turned into discrimination made possible by terrorism. A world where conservative nationalism is growing. A world where Arab puppet dictators have fallen and nothing better has come in their place. A world where the bad steps that were dangerous for the third world have now become dangerous for the first world. A place where neoliberalism is creating more inequality and more environmental disorder. We are born into a world that has been ruined, and all we have to cling to is hope. Hope for a better future. Hope for a utopia. But we're not idiots. We know that utopias don't exist. But they're still useful. Two Dutch guys wrote this: as an impossible possibility, utopia should not be perceived as an ideological blueprint. However, much rather it should be understood as a tool, a looking glass, for scanning this world and others for alternative possibilities. A looking glass for scanning this world. Now, do you see where I'm going? You see, our church has a utopia, a never-ending theocratical kingdom of love and equality. Heaven on earth, literally. And that impossible possibility, that hope of something we will never have, but in the meantime, we can use it as a mirror for the world. We can look into the kingdom and scan the earth, looking for possibilities. We see that this world is ruined, but we see that we can make a small local difference. And we want to do that. We want to be the church that is a force for good in a ruined world. We want to be a reflection of the kingdom that we hope for. And if we want to be the church that meets contemporary culture, we need to be a church that reflects the good of the kingdom into this world, treating what we hope for as a tool for thinking differently in this one. We need to go and do, not sit and talk. But the third way we can be a church for the contemporary culture is awesomeness. See, awesome is an awesome word. And if you haven't lived under a rock this year, you saw or heard of the Lego movie with a song about awesomeness. Everything is awesome. And I got a little excerpt from it. Life is good because everything is awesome. Lost my job? A new opportunity. More free time for my awesome community. Stepped in mud, got new brown shoes. It's awesome to win, it's awesome to lose. Blue skies, bouncy springs, we just named two awesome things. A Nobel Prize, a piece of string. You know what's awesome? Everything. Everything you see, think or say, is awesome. Now let's think. Is everything awesome? Of course not. Are the things they're naming awesome? Not really. Stepping in mud's not very cool, and string is kind of boring, but everything is awesome. It sounds so totally ridiculous, and yet it sounds oh so right. A couple of years ago, everyone would have interpreted this song as ironic, making fun of current culture as a joke, that they did not mean this seriously. And it is ironic, but at the same time, the younger generation see this song to be sincere. See, in the Lego movie, this song is both the anthem of the terrible totalitarian state. I shouldn't have put so many T's after each other. Both the anthem of a terrible totalitarian state, but it's also the catchy tune that really cheers Emmett up when he's down, that he loves. And even when he finds out that it's the anthem of everything he hates, he still likes it because it's awesome. You see, everything is awesome is a lie, and it's the truth at the same time. And that is awesome. Because everything is awesome. Now, technically awesome, and I mean, we reach this in the Bible, it comes from the word awe. You know, it's kind of terror mixed with wonder, fear mixed with ecstasy. What you experience when you see God. Nowadays, it's kind of lost the fear bit, and it's more wonder or delight. So it's moved from a very profound and metaphorical topic to something much more mundane. It's moved from God down to string. But at the same time, it remains something more than just mundane. Because there are things in this world that we have no words for. Awesome things that do not fit in any category. Things that are so outside the box, so delightfully entertaining that they just pull you in. Evel Knievel. Those YouTube one-hit wonders, you know, Gangnam Style, Charlie Bit My Finger, 800 million views of a kid biting another kid's finger. Why is it interesting? I don't know, but it's awesome. Things that you can only describe with that word. And these things are so popular because they give us a break from the numbing cynicism that might otherwise threaten to overwhelm and immobilize us, especially given the vast inundation of often negative information with which we are continually bombarded. Is everything awesome? Probably not. But if we behave as though it is, we may well achieve something meaningful through that informed naivety. And we may actually enjoy ourselves in the process. See, if we want to be a culturally relevant church, we need to have space for the awesome. And yes, of course, we have the ultimate and the original awesome, God, but it's more than that. We have a hope that can bring optimism and make us understand that even bad things can be awesome. And if we want to be a church that meets contemporary culture, we need to be awesome. We need to celebrate awesomeness. And we need to make others feel awesome. Because remember, everything is awesome. And the last way of being a church for the contemporary culture is storytelling. And we've now come full circle. See, my grandmother is long dead, but she still speaks to my generation through her stories. Her stories without lessons teach lessons. And her stories just tell stories. And those stories create meanings in our lives. You will never forget the dead rabbit. And that is the power of stories. And if we want to be a church for the contemporary world, we need to be a storytelling church. A church of theological storytellers. And this might go against what we naturally think. But there is no need. See, I could spend another 20 minutes trying to convince you with argument and counter-argument that stories are wonderful theology. But let me tell you a story. A youth member came to me and asked me, "Can you explain forgiveness? Because I'm struggling with how it feels to be forgiven." And the pastor and the theologian in me immediately thought of Micah 7. The Lord will again have compassion with us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. He will cast all our sins in the depths of the sea. I thought about reading that with a youngster, studying that passage, doing a good exegesis and showing him that the sins are at the bottom of the sea and we kind of deep sea diving to pull them back up. But the metamodernist in me answered something different. There was this man who ran over a cat, and he recognized the cat. It was his neighbor's. So he stopped at the neighbor's house and he rang the doorbell, cat in his hands, tears on his face, and he apologized to the neighbor. And the neighbor was sad, but he knew it was an accident. So he said, "Thank you for telling me. I forgive you." The two men went out back. They had a little cat funeral, said some words, and all was good with the world. The next morning, the doorbell rang. The man stood there at the door with the cat in his hands, tears on his face, and he says, "Oh, I'm so very sorry I ran over your cat." The man says, "Yes, I know, you told me that yesterday, I forgave you." He said, "Yes, but I feel so bad." He said, "I forgive you, let's go back." Buried the cat. All was well with the world. Till the next morning. And the man stood at the door. Tears on his face, cat in his hands, he says, "Oh, I feel so bad. I killed your cat." And the man said, "Yes, I know, and I've forgiven you." And then went out back. And I asked the youngster, "Do you understand forgiveness now?" He understood. So let us go forth and be bringers of awesome, sharers of utopia, storytelling prophets for the contemporary world, always remembering that everything is awesome. I don't know, yeah? If we have time, yeah? Just 30 seconds.
Turn signal, park between the lines. Yes! Drop off dry cleaning before noon, read the headlines.
Oh, yeah,
Don't
then?
forget to smile. Always root for the local sports team. Go sports team! Always return a compliment. Hey, you look nice. So do you. Drink overpriced coffee.
There you go. That's $37.
Awesome!